Hey everybody, this is... oh crap.
Okay, hey everybody, this is Russ Metro Game Core. Let's ignore that last part. Today we're going to talk about the TrimUI Brick. We've got a new operating system called PakUI, and this essentially is MinUI with a bunch of additional tools added to it to really enhance the gameplay experience. In this video, we're going to go over all of its various features, including Wi-Fi, the ability to create your own customized themes, and it also will scrape your box art. And PakUI also comes with a GameSwitcher, so we can jump into our most recently played games and then launch them from here. And the way I see it, if you've got a TrimUI Brick, which honestly is one of my favorite small handhelds of all time, you really owe it to yourself to try out this PakUI because it is a super simple installation process. You literally just drag and drop some files onto a new SD card, add your games, and off you go. Either way, I think we're going to have a lot of fun going over everything. So without any further delay, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, let's start by talking about what PakUI really is and what it can do, and what separates it from the other options that we have for the TrimUI Brick. And we should start by talking about MinUI, which is the operating system I've been using on the TrimUI Brick for the past several months, and it's really pared down. You can see it's a super simple interface, it's text-based, and you just basically jump in and out of your games from here. And that is the design ethos of MinUI, is to be super simple, just get in and out of your games and not really worry about the operating system in the first place. Now, there are a lot of people like me who love this simplicity because it focuses on the gameplay itself, but it also has some inherent limitations. No Wi-Fi, no additional options other than a couple emulator tweaks. Now, I made a whole video about this, but I did go through and add additional systems that are not officially supported, things like Arcade and Neo Geo, and adding in like native Pico 8. So I've added in a couple systems, but not that many. Now, one of the great things about MinUI is it has this special feature called packs that essentially allow you to create additional scripts and programs that can be ran within MinUI without fundamentally changing MinUI in the first place. They're kind of like add-on enhancements. And the team behind PakUI basically took the ability to use those packs and then created its own operating system by layering everything on top of it. So it still is fundamentally MinUI, but with a bunch of enhancements added to it. And so the end result is something that is very similar to MinUI, but has special enhancements to it, including, like backgrounds and box art, and then also allows you to tailor it however you would like. If you want it very simple, you still can. If you want to add even more complex options, you can do that too. And so we're essentially talking about a very simple operating system that has been tweaked even more to make it really user-friendly. So along with additional consoles, and there are quite a few, we even have things like, a media player and the ability to actually go to YouTube channels and download their latest releases and watch them on the device. We can also do things like add additional collections directly on the device, like a playlist of all your favorite games or maybe a favorite franchise. Or you can choose to do things like boot directly into a specific game or an app. And we'll go over all of these features one by one here in a moment, but in a nutshell, that's essentially what PakUI is a bunch of additional tools that are layered on top of MinUI to give you a more enhanced experience if you want it. Now, MinUI and PakUI are not the only operating system choices that we have on this device. We've got the stock operating system that comes with it, which honestly is not half bad. And we also have one called CrossMix that has been in the works for quite some time, which is basically an enhanced version of the stock operating system as well. There's also an early build of Newly, which is a Batocera fork, also available for that. That's going to be a lot more flashy with things like video previews and portmaster support, stuff like that. And then finally, there's an actual fork of MinUI where somebody took that and made their own operating system. This one is called NextUI. Now, even though the names are similar, NextUI is quite a bit different than PakUI and MinUI itself. This one essentially forks off and builds upon MinUI in its own ways. For example, they've adjusted like the video and audio quality to enhance them even further. They've also added their own version of the GameSwitcher and the ability to add your own game art as well. It does have some other great features as well, including a deep sleep function, which we'll talk about here in a moment. Now, this video is focused on PakUI, so we're not going to talk too much about NextUI, but there's an excellent video that just came out recently from Zoo. I'll leave it linked down below, and he walks through the installation and showcase of this operating system. And even though Zoo himself is kind of a sketchy guy, the video itself is pretty good. Anyway, my point here is that, yeah, we've got a lot of options here when it comes comes to the TrimUI Brick, which I think is a testament to how awesome and popular this handheld is. And so I do expect that PakUI is probably not the last operating system we'll see either. And so I'll leave all the other ones linked down below if you want to check them out. But today we're going to focus on PakUI because there are some very unique features to this. Now, before we jump into the PakUI installation and everything else, there is one other thing I wanted to bring up, and it's what they call limbo mode. This has been popping up over the past few weeks on the TrimUI channels. And so essentially what is happening here is that users have found when they power off the device, sometimes the TrimUI Brick does not fully power on. Now, we're not really sure what's going on here, if it's an issue with the firmware itself on the device, or if it's something to do with MinUI, but essentially what'll happen is it'll appear that your device turned off when it's actually still running. Now, this is a pretty rare thing. I've been messing around with the TrimUI Brick for months, and it's only happened to me twice. And essentially what happened is I powered off the device, and then a few minutes later, I went and I felt the back of it, and right here in the metal heatsink, it was getting a little bit warmer than I had expected because it was essentially turned on, but with the screen off. If that happens to you, you've got to press the reset button on the bottom of the device, and that will reset everything, and then you can power it off. And so something to be aware of is this thing called limbo mode. Now, NextUI has got a pretty good workaround for it. They're calling it deep sleep mode. So instead of pressing the power button and turning the device off, when you tap on the power button, it goes into deep sleep mode, which doesn't really drain the battery, but doesn't actually turn it off. And so from there, you just tap the power button again, it comes back on. And so you don't have to worry about powering it down and essentially getting into that limbo mode by accident. So NextUI definitely has a leg up when it comes to that. I think that's pretty awesome. But there are other things that NextUI doesn't quite have just yet, including things like Wi-Fi. And so each of these are kind of a work in progress in their own way. Regardless, I wanted to bring it up because you can get into limbo mode with PakUI and even MinUI. It is relatively rare, like I mentioned before. My advice is that when you turn off the device and you feel the back of it after a couple minutes, and if it's still warm, then it probably went into limbo mode. But again, after using this for hundreds and hundreds of times, it's only happened to me once or twice. I don't want to downplay the issue because there are some people who have been having it happen more often. But long story short, yeah, just something to be aware of with the TrimUI Brick. It's really funky. Hopefully the community can kind of figure out what the solution is for it, and it'll be something we won't have to worry about in the future. Okay, I'm going to jump over to the computer now. Let's install PakUI as well as show you how to add your games and stuff like that. Now, first thing, you'll need a micro SD card. If you have anything larger than 32 gigabytes, say for example, this 64 gigabyte card that I'm using here, then you will need to use a special program to format it to FAT32. This app is called Rufus. It's totally free and really good when it comes to flashing firmwares and stuff like that. But today we're just going to use it to reformat the card. So as you can see, I've already got my card labeled right here, and under boot selection, change this to non-bootable. Now under format options, change the file system to large FAT32. If you'd like, you can give the microSD card a fancy name, but other than that, that's all you have to do. So you can hit start right here and then say, yeah, man, I want to do it. And then it'll take a moment and it'll reformat the card. And so there you go. We've got a freshly formatted FAT32 card that we can put PakUI on. Now, by the time this video releases, PakUI will be available on GitHub, and you'll have a link to it. You can just download the zip file from there. We're working on this before the app actually launches, so you can see that I have the zip file, but this is what it's going to look like when you grab it. From there, we'll open up the zip file with an app called 7-Zip, and I've already got it installed here, so I'm just going to go and right-click here, and then go into 7-Zip, and then open Archive. And this is what the files are going to look like inside of the zip file, and all you really have to do is just drag and drop these over into the microSD card. Just make sure you also grab the ones that have the dot in front of the name. Those are really important. So we're just going to grab these and then move them over to our 64 gigabyte card. It's going to extract and then move them over. The process to drag and drop these files over might take some time. It takes about maybe 5-10 minutes altogether because there are just lots of little files that it's moving over. No big deal right here, just give it a minute. Okay, now that we've moved everything over, let's take a look at the microSD card and see what we can do with it before we even put it in our device. So number one thing, we can add our BIOS and ROMs files. Let's talk about the ROMs folders first. So within here, you can see there are now a bunch of systems that are supported with PakUI, including things like arcade games, Atari, and your regular stuff is here as well, Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, and whatnot. It is worth noting that the higher end systems, things like Dreamcast, Nintendo 64, they're not listed here in PakUI. And so we are really looking at something that is capped out at PS1 and below, much like with MinUI, but with all the other systems in between here supported. And you guessed it, the way that you would add your games is just to go into the folder here and then drag and drop your ROM files. Now back on the main folder, we have our BIOS folder, and this one is a little bit different than what you may be used to. The number one thing is that you have to put your BIOS files directly in the folder for the system. So your Game Boy BIOS will go right here. Same thing, for example, with PS1. You'd want to put them in the PlayStation folder instead of actually just having one big BIOS folder. They all have individual subfolders. So it is just a very simple process here of just adding your BIOS files and your ROMs files, and really that's about it. We can do everything else on the device itself. So just add those, you can eject the SD card and then put it into your device. Okay, so we've got two different TrimUI bricks to work with. I have the purple one here with the freshly installed PakUI right here. So this is going to be just fresh out of the box, what it's going to be like when you first install it. But then I also have my white one, which I've been working on for a few days now. This one's got an older SD card. And so this is what it's going to look like when we have everything fully set up. So we'll use this one later. For now, let's start up the purple one and see how everything goes with that initial installation process. So first thing, it's going to install PakUI and all the dependencies that are required. So you don't really have to do anything here, just kind of leave it for like 5 or 10 minutes while all that stuff installs. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like once you've gone through the installation. You'll have a listing here of all of your games, provided that you've added ROMs for them. And I have done that. That's why you're seeing them here. But then they also have something called BitPal. I'm going to save that for later. This thing is really special. In addition, we've got a favorites list that you can enhance yourself. You can just go in here and then you type in like the options right here. And then you can just go and add games. You can rename it to something else, or you can change the way it's sorted. For example, if you wanted them to be alphabetical, you can do that. Below that, we've got all of our game systems. We go into Game Boy, you can see we've got them listed here, and we could just launch the game from here if we would like, but obviously we got a lot of other things we want to change. Now, the big separating factor of PakUI from regular MinUI is this tools function. There is a bunch of stuff that we can do within here. By default, you're only going to see a few options, like the ability to jump into the GameSwitcher thing like Onion OS, or change out your artwork, for example, to change your theme or boot logo on the fly. We've also got the options here to change out our display parameters. You want to add additional contrast or saturation to the screen, this is where you would do it. We can also jump directly into RetroArch, and yes, every single system here can be booted with RetroArch if you want. If you turn on Wi-Fi, that means you can use things like retro achievements. But the vast majority of all of the other tools are actually hidden under this Pack Manager. So the way this works is if you go into Pack Manager, you can choose to install specific packs if you would like. So by default, you have very limited options, but once you go into Pack Manager, you can install dozens of others. For example, if we go into the gaming section, we can see that we can turn on a bunch of other options, like the ability to add collection on the fly, or for example, if you want the emulator options, this will allow you to choose between launching the game through the regular version of RetroArch or through the default one, which is the MinUI version of RetroArch. There's also other tools like the ability to use a game time tracker to track your progress, or you can have a kid mode, or if you want Moonlight game streaming to stream from a PC to your device. All this stuff is available within here, but you have to turn it on first. So the idea is there's a lot of tools within PakUI that are not going to be front and center because they want to keep this a very simple operating system experience. The main guy behind PakUI is the first developer of Spruce, which is an operating system for the MIUI A30, and a lot of people love that. And I think a lot of those really simple ethos ideas carried over from things like Onion OS and MinUI into PakUI. Now, there are a bunch of other options. I don't want to go through all of them right now because I'm going to go through them one at a time here in a moment, but I just wanted to show that if you are looking for additional tools, you want to go into the Pack Manager. This is where you can do that. And so this is where I'm going to jump into my fully set up version of PakUI, because what I've done is in the tools section, I basically enabled all of them. So we can go through these one by one and say exactly what each one will do. So let's start with GameSwitcher, the first option that we have available here. Now, I already talked about this being kind of similar to Onion OS, and that it'll show all your recently played games, and then what you can do is you can select them, and it's going to go exactly where you were in the game. So it's kind of like saving a moment in time with each of these games, and when you exit out of it, it'll just add it to the GameSwitcher. By the way, to exit out of a game, you just have to press the menu and start at the same time. It'll save your progress and then take you over to GameSwitcher, and so this is how you get back and forth between them. And again, you can just kind of jump between your games. So say you wanted to try out Blaster Master here on the NES, it'll go right back to where you are. Once you're done playing it, you'll just do the menu and start to go back to this main menu. Now, a couple things here. If you just want to exit out of GameSwitcher, get back to the main menu, just press the B button to exit. It's labeled right there. But also there's an options menu, and this gets really interesting. And I think the most important thing down here is that you can set a hotkey. So essentially what you can do is at any time when you're in the menu, you can press a hotkey to actually just jump right right into GameSwitcher. And we got 5 different options to choose from. We've got the menu button, so if you're in the regular menu, you press that, it'll bring up GameSwitcher, and you can also do the same with L2 and R2. But the nice thing about the TrimUI Brick is that it has these 2 front buttons up here called F1 or F2 or L3 or R3, depending on the OS you're using. So what I like to do is I set it to F1, which is going to be this leftmost hotkey right there. Once you set the hotkey, you'll have to restart your device one time just to make it stick. But after that, when you press the F1 button, it just takes you into GameSwitcher. How awesome is that? And so ideally, if you start up the device and you're in your main menu and you're like, you know what, I don't want to browse anything, I'm just going to press this button, it'll show you all your games right here and you can just jump directly into them from here. So I think it's one of the coolest options altogether in that we can just get in and out of our games really quickly with this nice visual interface, which I think enhances the overall experience. Now I'm going to jump through a couple of these tools just to make it more intuitive. So we're going to jump down to Boot To. This one is really interesting as well. So this one gives you the option to choose what you want to boot into when you start up the game. So right now it's just booting into your regular MinUI interface. But if you wanted to have it launch directly into GameSwitcher, you could do that instead. You've got a bunch of other options too. Like say, for example, you have a custom collection, like all the Mario games. You want to just launch into a list of the Mario games, you can do that. You want to jump into PakUI Explore function, you can do that as well. A couple of these are really interesting, like you could just have it launch into a random game, so you would never know what you're going to start up with. It's kind of like a Russian roulette. Or if you have a specific game you want to launch into, or maybe even a specific tool, you can do that instead. And then finally, something else you can launch into is this thing called BitPal, which I mentioned earlier. Now, I'm not really sure what to call BitPal. It's kind of like an app and a game and a tool all in one. It's really interesting. The guy who's behind PakUI, which is that Spruce developer I mentioned before, he's the one that made this, and he's been calling it his little buddy. But I think the best way to describe it is just to open it up and show you what happens. So we get a little emoji right here and it'll change, and it'll always give you like a funny little thing as you first start it up. It'll also give you a random gaming fact first time you start it up, so it'll kind of make you a little bit smarter. Now, once you get into it, you can see here, it'll show your BitPal and your current level. I'm at level 2 right here, but it starts at level 0 and kind of works its way up. And the way this works is you can basically go through your current status or start a new mission, or if you've completed missions, it'll show them here as well. So let's start a new mission. And what happens is the first thing it'll say, choose your mission, and it's got a couple that you can choose from. So this is where it gets really clever. For example, it knows that I've already played a little bit of Chrono Trigger. So it's like, okay, do you want to rediscover it? And it has like a certain amount of time. You can't really see it because it's cut off, but it's basically saying, okay, one of your missions could be, if you would like, to play a little bit more Chrono Trigger. Or the next mission is that you can pick your own game from the Game Boy Advance catalog and then play that for a certain amount of time, and that will help you get more EXP. Further down, it'll just randomly pick a game from your catalog and say, okay, how about this one instead? Do you want to play Pokemon Ruby version? And then finally, it may give you an option for a surprise game. So this one gives you no choice. You're basically going to start this up, and it could be from any of the systems that you have already installed. So for this example, we're going to choose the Game Boy Advance mission. So I'm going to pick that, and it's going to ask us to pick our game from the catalog. So now I'm going to scroll through and I'm going to say, all right, well, what is the game I actually want to play? Let's do F-Zero Maximum Velocity. And after that, it'll say, okay, you've accepted your mission, and this mission is to play that Game Boy Advance game for 13 minutes. You'll get 78 XP for it, and it's not going to work with GameSwitcher, so they just mentioned that right here. From there, you can choose to start the game right now, or you can just say later. So it's going to be added to your list of missions, but you don't actually have to do it right now. And the thing is, you can stack up to like 4 or 5 missions at once. So I can go back into the BitPal here, start a new mission. It's going to give me more options again. And so now I've got 4 new options to choose from. It's saying, okay, play Blades of Steel for 10 minutes. This one is saying play a Game Boy Color game for 7 minutes. And then this one is saying play Galaga from the arcade systems for 6 minutes, or again, a surprise. And all this stuff is random. So it's just picking these games out of my catalog. It's assigning just a random number to it. And it'll also give you some XP depending on how long that mission is. So let's say that I want to play Galaga for 6 minutes. So I'll pick that one next. It'll say, okay, mission 2 accepted, 6 minutes, you only get 42 XP this time. And so now I've got 2 missions loaded up, and you can have all the way up to 5. So I really like this concept because it's kind of incentivizing you to play games that you may not actually think about, especially that surprise game one. Like, that's been really fun for me because I'll just pick a random game and it's like, wow, I wasn't expecting that one, but now I can play it for like 10 minutes and get some XP for it. So that's pretty cool. Now also, when you hover over the mission, you can either just resume your game right here, or you can press the Y button to actually go into the options. The first thing it'll do is it'll show you your mission progress. So it'll say, okay, this is your mission. It's supposed to play it for 13 minutes, and you've only played it for 7 seconds out of the 13 minutes. So it'll track your progress. You don't have to do it all in one sitting. After that, if we press OK, it'll give us the option to resume this mission, or if maybe it's a little bit overwhelming or not as fun as you were hoping it would be, you can cancel the mission as well. It's going to make this guy a little bit sad, but you can definitely do it. And so this is BitPal in a nutshell. It's essentially like your little companion while you're playing games. And the one thing I've really loved about it is that it has pushed me in unexpected directions. Like, I didn't have any plans to play Galaga for 6 minutes, but now I kind of want to because I can get a little bit of XP and then go up a level. None of that actually matters. Like, these levels don't mean anything, but it's still just kind of cool to have somebody rooting for you. The way I've been thinking about it is if I was a kid and I was on a road trip stuck in the back of a car and we're driving across the state of Utah or something like that, and I'm just bored to tears, this little guy actually might make it a little bit more fun to play my retro games with. It doesn't have to be like turned on to Wi-Fi or anything else to work. It's just all a standalone app, but it might actually encourage you to play something that you wouldn't already. And so it might make a road trip like that a lot more fun. Or for example, with an adult version of me, like say I'm on an airplane and my ROG Ally battery is run dry, so I'm out of battery, and I don't really want to play another playthrough of Tecmo Super Bowl, but I want to play something. And this might give me some ideas that I hadn't thought of before. And so I think it's just a nice enhancement to the overall experience. So yeah, I'm really excited about this BitPal thing. I expect that it'll develop and mature over time as well, especially now that PakUI is out. We're going to get a lot of feedback and stuff like that. And so we will see probably new enhancements to this later in the future. Either way, it's totally optional, but just a very clever way of being able to play your retro games. It's basically like a game tracker function, but with an enhancement of this little guy to help you along the way. Even when you try to exit, it's going to kind of guilt trip you and be like, hey, are you sure you actually want to leave here? And you can either go back in or you can actually quit. And that's just kind of how it works. Either way, that's BitPal in a nutshell. And by default, it's going to show up here on your home page. And so this is something that you can have, or you can also disable within the tools section. Okay, further down, we've got a kid mode. So this essentially will just allow you to have a very curated list of games. So you make a collection that's going to be for kids games. And then when it's in kid mode, it basically will only go into that collection. It's worth noting that the password to get in and out of kid mode is 1234. So hopefully no kids are watching this right now. Other tools, we've got random games. So this will just launch a random game. I think that's self-explanatory. The add collection one here though is pretty neat. So it'll say adding new collection added. And now if we go back into the main menu, you can see we've got a new collection right here. From there, we can now go into it, and then what'll happen is we press the Y button to go into options, and now we can add games to our collection, or you can rename the collection so it doesn't just say new collection, and you can also choose to sort them as well. So it's kind of neat that you can just do this directly onto the device as opposed to pulling out the SD card and doing a text file thing, which you have to do with MinUI. So it's kind of just doing it all in one. I'm going to remove the collection for now just because I don't want it cluttering up my front page, but yeah, that's how it works. Okay, next tool is artwork. This is actually pretty neat. So we've got a few options here. We can create a new theme, we can disable that theme, we can disable our box art altogether, and we can also change our boot logo. Let's start with creating a new theme. So first thing, it's going to ask you to choose your icon style. So this is going to be a little icon that'll show on the right side of the screen as you're browsing through. And there are quite a few options here. We've got some that are like based on RetroArch, and then we have like this one right here. That's what I'm using right now. Let's do something a little bit different. So I'm going to pick this one right here, which is a nice little colored graphic. So we'll choose that. And then afterwards, it's going to say, okay, choose your background because you can layer it on. So either you can just have the icon like this, or if we go to the right, you can see that we'll have like a little bit of a border that we can add as well. There are a bunch of different options, but I like this green one the most. It kind of matches my mat right here, so I think that's pretty cool. Either way, that's what we're going to go with. It's going to apply the theme, then after that, that's what it's going to look like on our homepage. So here we are with our new theme. So I've got this green background and then these little colored icons. And so I think it's pretty cool. You know, like it obviously is not as flashy as something like Newly or Bodacera, but it is cool that you can enhance it and change it yourself here on the fly without having to actually know how to program or installing anything extra. Now back in the Artwork Manager tool, the other thing I wanted to talk about is the ability to change your boot logo. This is pretty cool too. This one is also a layered concept. So you can go through here, there are a bunch of different logos that you can choose from, including like the original MinUI one, or one that says PakUI, or actually the one that I made for the TrimUI Brick. So let's say we're going to use my logo design right here. So I'm going to choose that first, and then it's going to actually add that, but you can also choose a background to it as well. So it's very similar to choosing the theme that we did previously. So for example, you can go through and there are different colors, like this has a purple background, or we can have a gray background, and so on. And of course there's a black one, so if you don't want to see any background at all. Personally, I really like this one. I don't know if it's showing like, I don't know, Mars or something in the background, but it's just kind of a cool offset with something really retro and then something that looks very crisp and modern. So I'm going to use this one. I'm going to press the A button, and this will now become my boot logo. It's going to show this thing for a moment, and it'll reset your device, but after a moment you will see that it'll show my boot logo right here. Now by default, the TrimUI Brick always shows it really dim at first, and then it'll brighten up. It's just one of those things that the TrimUI Brick does as part of the firmware. Either way, yeah, I've got a new boot logo now, and I also have that custom theme. So it's pretty cool. I've already created like a new look and feel for my device right here. Okay, we've already talked about Boot 2. That allows you to basically launch into whatever app you would like. And the clock one here is self-explanatory. This is where you can set your time within the device itself, and that's going to be helpful for things like Pokemon games. We already talked about the display one as well. That's where you adjust things like, the saturation. Let's talk about the emulator options. So this is unique. You can basically choose how you want to launch each of your games. You have global options, system options, and per game settings. Let's go into system options. So let's go into, say, for example, Game Boy Advance. You can see here we've got two different launchers to choose from. We have MinArch, which is like the MinUI version of RetroArch, or we have just regular old RetroArch. You can choose one or the other. By default, it's going to have MinArch as your default launcher, which means that it's going to have a very simple user interface. But if you'd like, you can also run it through RetroArch, which means that it'll take advantage of Wi-Fi and retro achievements, some of those other enhancements that you can do in RetroArch, shaders, stuff like that. We're going to keep it within MinArch, but the really interesting thing is that you can change your cores as well. So if you want to use a specific core, you prefer to use MGBA over GPSP, you can do that within here as well. And then finally, you can choose whether or not you want your system to work with GameSwitcher. So for example, with Game Boy Advance, if we turn this one off, when we exit out of a game, it's not going to go to GameSwitcher. It'll just go back to the main menu. And again, these are more kind of advanced user functions, but it's really cool that you can just set this how you would like on a per system or even a per game basis. Okay, now let's talk about emulator sort. So this one allows you to basically choose how you want your front page to look. Now I've already went and set it up for myself, but you can see I have all my arcade games up front. Then below that, I've got my handheld systems, and I have it going kind of in a sequential order. Like it goes Game Boy Color, then Game Boy Advance. And then further down, I've got like my home console systems, Nintendo, Super Nintendo. Then further down, I've got like Sega Genesis and PlayStation. So I can adjust the order of these here by pressing the options, and then I can do like a manual reorder, or I can sort them A to Z. So it allows you to basically change the order of your systems within the front page. Let's now talk about the game time tracker. So this will basically show how long you've been playing each game. And I haven't been playing a lot of games very long, as you can tell, but it'll actually show them in order. Not only that, you can actually launch the game from here, or you can go into the options here and remove the game, or just say that you've finished it instead. Next up, we have the Input app. This is the same that's been in MinUI, so it just allows you to make sure that your buttons are working properly. But let's talk about the LED app. First thing, you have to enable the LEDs. I have them turned off by default, but you can see that yes, you can turn them on. In addition, you've got a bunch of different options here. You can change out the different colors. They have like a multicolor one, or you can go and change the brightness, and there are different effects as well, like a breathing effect or just having static ones. You can have all that adjusted here. You've also got various LED zones. So if we go into here, you can change them specifically for any of the different LED options we have on the TrimUI Brick. So let's make a quick change right here. Let's go into colors, then multicolor. Let's try the purple cyan option. So now we've got purple here on the front, and then you can see that it kind of goes across in different colors here on the top, and then purple on the back as well. So lots of options within here. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of using these LEDs, so I just usually will disable them. But it's cool that we have an app that allows us to make those adjustments if you would like. Now, Moonlight is working. You need the IP address of your computer to insert into this app. And then also, obviously, that computer needs to be running something like Sunshine or Apollo so that you can stream from it. Personally, I don't see a lot of value in having Moonlight streaming just because you don't have a lot of control options, and we are talking about a 3.2-inch screen. So it's there if you want it, and it does work. Now, OTA update is obviously not working right now because this is the very first launch of PakUI, but the idea here is that as we get future versions of this app, you can just update everything directly through here. We already talked about the Pack Manager. That's where you can go in and actually turn on all these tools. And for this white console in particular, I did already turn them all on. That's why we have them all in a row. Now, one of my favorites is the screen scraper function. So this allows us to scrape box art for our games. We've got quite a few options. We can scrape all of them, we can choose just a specific system, or we can also scrape a single game. And the nice thing here is you don't need any sort of login or anything to scrape this stuff. So for example, if we want to just scrape a single game, let's pick one right now. Let's go into, say for example, Super Nintendo, and even though it's going to show all of your ROMs and your, box art already, let's go and just re-scrape one. Let's try this Battletoads and Battle Maniacs. So I'm going to select this one. It's going to ask you, hey, it already has an image. Do you want to replace it? We're going to say, yeah, man, and we want to do it. It'll take a minute to actually scrape the image, but once it's done, you'll see a bunch of options. So you can see there are 4 different images that it pulled up. We've got this one here, or this one, or no image. So they're basically all the same, but that's how you would scrape an individual game. Personally, I just did scrape all systems and I was done after that. It was actually pretty fast as well, only took a few minutes. Now, Syncthing is working. I tested it out earlier, but it is relatively limited just because of the way that save files are saved on the TrimUI Brick. It also does require login credentials. I'll put them right here on the screen. But essentially, yes, I was able to get it to work, but it is something that's a little bit more for advanced users. Now, Wi-Fi is great as well. What you can do in here is you can basically, connect to your Wi-Fi, but then also you can manage your network. So you can have multiple logins if you would like. So for example, I have my credentials for here in the studio as well as at home. So I don't have to put in my password every time I take this to another place. And then finally, maybe the best for last, we have this YouTube channel option right here within the tools. So this one already has a couple channels added, but you can actually go and add additional channels as well. So you can go in here and add a new channel if you would like. And so the way this works is after you have your channel added right here, you can go in and select it. And from there, you've got a couple options. You can download the latest 5 videos or just the latest single video. And once you've downloaded it, in your front page, you will have the media player. You can go in here and then you can find your video. So for example, here, I downloaded my MinUI Flip version 2 video. And so once you select it, yeah, you can play your videos right here. So you can watch YouTube videos on the TrimUI Brick. I thought that was pretty fancy. Now, I'm not sure how many people would want to actually do that, but it's just one of those cool things about PakUI is that it gives you the option to do things like this if you want it. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about Pico 8 because there are some really interesting things with this one. Number one, it has support for the native Pico app, including Explore. And so what you will do here is just put your BIOS files, the Raspberry Pi files from Pico 8 directly into the BIOS folder on your SD card. And from there, you will be able to launch Explore. And if you've ever used this app before, it's going to be very familiar. You can go in, like, for example, go into your featured, and you can go through and actually download and play games directly from here. So for example, let's try out Xterra, one of my favorite shmups that's available on Pico 8. So it's going to download it directly from their servers, and then we can launch the game from here. I think it's pretty awesome. Now, what you want to do is you can press start and then, exit back to Explore. You can also make it a favorite. So all those Explore functions that you may be used to are all available within here. But the thing is, this version of Pico 8 within PakUI has a bunch more features. If we press the menu button, it'll bring up its own feature set. So of course we can go in and resume and restart our game and open Explore, but here's where it gets really interesting. We can also download our carts. Basically any game that you've downloaded to play, they'll start to show up here in the menu. Now, obviously, I've only played Xterra, so I have Xterra and then the stage. This is a multi-cart game, but I can just take this cart right here, Xterra stage, and I can choose to download it. It'll say that it's added to the ROM folder. So what I can do now is if I go down here and then I exit back to MinUI, which again is a really kind of neat feature, now we have Xterra showing up and it has the box art already added. So think about this. You can go through Explore, find a bunch of games to play, and then choose to download them and have them show up in your ROMs folder with the box art already. I think that's a really awesome feature. So even though there are many ways to play Pico 8 on many different handheld devices, this might actually be the best implementation that I've ever seen. And so now that we understand how all these features work within PakUI, let me walk you through a day in the life of a PakUI user. When you first start it up, you've got a bunch of options. Obviously, you can go into your recently played games. You can jump into BitPal and maybe make some progress there. Or of course, you can just navigate through any of your systems and launch your games from here. In addition, if you would like, you can press, whatever hotkey you have set up to jump into the GameSwitcher, so you can do that as well. Now let's say we're going to start up a new game. I'm going to go into NES here, and then let's start up Bionic Commando. It'll take a moment to actually start up the game, but here we are. Now, what we want to do at this point is we can press the menu button to actually bring up the MinArch menu. And within here, it's all the same stuff you would expect from MinUI. So you can continue your game, you can save your game, you can load your save state, and also you can go into the options menu. You've got a bunch of options within here. And I've talked about this a lot in my other MinUI videos, so I don't want to go too far into the weeds here, but yes, you can set up things like your screen scaling options, your screen effect, and all that other kind of stuff. You can also make per system shortcuts or hotkeys. So if I go into here, you can see that I have save and quit as menu and start together. And then also for these two buttons, I have cycle scaling and cycle effect. I've also got toggle fast forward as my R2 button. And so all that stuff is already set up from a previous setup that I did. And so what I can do here is I can press this button to change my aspect ratio, or I can also change my screen effect. So this is scan lines, this is a pixel grid, or just back to the regular image. And then of course I can press menu and start to exit out of the game, and it'll take me over to GameSwitcher. And so now I can go to my next game, or press B to get me back into the main menu. And so that's the beauty of PakUI. It's a very simple setup. It really just focuses on your games, but it has enough enhancements to allow you to tinker around if you would like. And I think this little BitPal thing is kind of a perfect mixture between the two, in that it kind of feeds that little tinkering side of me as well, because I have little carrots to chase, but it also is really focused on just playing games in the first place. So it does feel very 90s to me, which I think is fitting for a retro handheld like this. Now, one of my favorite features of MinUI also works in PakUI. If you're in the middle of a game like this, you can press and hold the power button. It's going to create a quick save and then power the device off. And the next time that you start up your device, it's not only going to remember that you were in a game, but it's going to remember that you have that quick save. And so it'll launch directly into your game and the same moment that you were at when you turned it off in the first place. And so there we go. We are now back into Dragon Warrior 3, just like that. And then of course, if we want to exit out of the game, it'll take us over to the GameSwitcher. Now let's talk about some feature enhancements I would love to see with PakUI. The first is that because this is based on MinUI, it has some of the inherent limitations of that OS. The number one thing is that if you leave this device on idle in the menu for 30 seconds or longer, it's going to go into sleep mode. So you see right there, it actually went into sleep mode. It's because I was yapping for 30 seconds. So now it's in sleep mode, and that means that after 2 minutes, it's actually going to power the device off. Now, of course, you can just tap on the power button to bring it out of sleep, but that's one of those things that's inherent in MinUI that I think is just a little bit too fast. I'd love it to go into sleep mode maybe after a minute or two, but 30 seconds is just too much for me. In addition, I'd love for it to go into deep sleep mode like it does with NextUI. I think that's a really neat feature. And then finally, one other thing I know the team is already working on is I would love to see within the tools Portmaster. I'd love to be able to play Portmaster on this. After all, it has Wi-Fi, which means it should be pretty easy to be able to download your games. Regardless, I really love the PakUI experience. I love that we have the GameSwitcher and that we have Wi-Fi and scraping, and then that BitPal thing is really cool. It's kind of like a little Tamagotchi on my TrimUI Brick. And I can't wait to see what the community thinks about it as well once they get their hands on it and start poking and prodding and giving new suggestions to the development team. Let me know if you've got any questions in the comments down below, but as it stands right now, I'm going to be jumping back into BitPal and leveling up. As always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.